My name is Emily. I'm 31 and I was the quiet one in the family. I thought maybe this time they'd see me. But even at Grandpa's will reading, I was still invisible. They gave my sister $6.9 million and handed me a single dollar. Then the lawyer cleared his throat, and everything shifted. They were already seated when I walked in. The long oak table stretched across the center of the room, polished to a dull gleam under the overhead chandelier. My mother sat closest to the fireplace, her wine glass already half full. Olivia, of course, sat next to her, radiant in a deep blue dress that caught the light just right, as if she'd chosen it with the intention of being the center of the room. Maybe she had. My father stood behind her, laughing at something she'd just said. No one looked up when I entered. I paused for a beat, not long enough to make it awkward, but just enough to register the silence, then made my way to the empty seat near the end. Not quite at the table's edge, but certainly not where family would place someone they considered important. I pulled the chair out slowly. The screech of the legs against the hardwood floor was the only thing that acknowledged my presence. It was the first family gathering since Grandpa passed. The will reading had been scheduled right after Thanksgiving, when everyone would already be in town. Efficient Martha had said, "Not emotional. Let's just get through it," she told Olivia on the phone. I wasn't meant to overhear that call, but I did. A fire crackled behind the grate. The lawyer hadn't arrived yet, but everyone was already drinking. Henry poured himself a bourbon and offered some to Olivia. She declined and turned to Martha with that conspiratorial smile they always shared, the kind that said, "We understand each other." She doesn't. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself before draping it behind my chair. No one had taken it from me. They hadn't taken my silence either. That was still mine. "I thought you weren't coming," Olivia finally said, not looking up from her glass. I smiled politely. I wasn't sure I'd be able to. Martha leaned in toward her daughter. "Well, it's good you did. Grandpa would have wanted everyone here. Especially Olivia." She smiled, sipping her wine, never once looking at me. I didn't respond. The silence had become something I wore easily. A memory flickered Grandpa's last birthday. He'd asked me to sit beside him even when the rest of them insisted the seat was already taken. I remembered his hand, warm and insistent, gripping mine under the tablecloth. "Stay," he'd whispered, "don't let them push you out." I stayed then. And I was staying now. The front door opened suddenly, cold air sweeping through the room. Mr. Caldwell entered, trenchcoat soaked from the light December rain, briefcase in hand. His arrival changed the energy. Everyone sat up straighter, adjusted their tones. Olivia even uncrossed her legs. "Sorry I'm late," he said, voice calm and steady as always. "Shall we begin?" I looked down the table. Every eye had shifted to him except one. Olivia's gaze flicked to me for just a second. I caught the hesitation, the calculation. She knew I had no idea what was in the will, but she didn't think I mattered. I folded my hands in my lap. Let them talk. Let them assume. The real reading hadn't begun. The chairs creaked slightly as everyone settled. Mr. Caldwell placed his briefcase on the table with care, fingers methodical as he clicked it open. From inside, he pulled out a slim folder, a manila one with just a single gold paperclip on top. Simple, understated. Like Grandpa. Olivia leaned forward, hands neatly folded like she was at a charity board meeting. Martha adjusted her necklace, the one she only wore to events she wanted to seem important at. Henry stayed standing for a moment longer, hovering behind them, then finally sat beside Olivia, his hand resting on her shoulder with a lightness that said, "You've already won." I sat still. The leather of my chair had a small tear in the seam. I ran my thumb along it absently as Mr. Caldwell began. As executor of Mr. James Whitmore's estate, he said, voice firm but not theatrical, "I will now read the final provisions outlined in his will, signed and witnessed on October 11th of this year." Martha exhaled long and slow, as if she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Olivia's smile curved slightly. I expected the usual legal wording. I expected to my beloved granddaughter Olivia, and I expected to hear my name once politely toward the end. But what I didn't expect was the way Mr. Caldwell's tone shifted. He glanced up, once eyes passing over each of us, before landing near my end of the table. Before we proceed, he said, "Mr. Whitmore requested I begin with a short letter, handwritten, dated 2 days before his passing." That changed the room. Henry leaned forward. Martha blinked almost imperceptibly. Olivia's fingers tensed. Mr. Caldwell opened the second envelope inside the folder and carefully unfolded a piece of thick paper. The edges had yellowed slightly. Grandpa's handwriting was bold and slanted, I could tell from where I sat. He used to write in block letters when it mattered. "My dear family," Mr. Caldwell read aloud. "If you're hearing this, I am already gone, and I imagine the mood in the room is tense." A few dry chuckles. Martha smiled tightly. Olivia looked like she was about to laugh too, but didn't. "But I ask you," the letter continued, "before you assume you know my intentions, listen carefully. I have watched all of you in different rooms across different years. Some of you showed up only when it was convenient. Others showed up even when you were made to feel like you weren't wanted. There it was." My chest tightened, not from shock, but recognition. I didn't look at anyone. Mr. Caldwell paused, a calculated silence, the kind lawyers use when they know the weight of a sentence needs space to land. Then he folded the letter and set it aside. "We'll continue with the provisions now." Olivia glanced at Martha. It was quick, but I caught a flicker of concern masked behind a rehearsed calm. Mr. Caldwell began listing the assets, the lake house, the investment accounts, the collection of vintage books. Each item read like a bullet point in a life well lived. Every significant piece of Grandpa's legacy went to Olivia. Her name kept repeating, "To Olivia Whitmore. To my granddaughter, Olivia." She nodded, poised eyes occasionally flitting toward me as if daring me to flinch. I didn't. Let her keep watching. When Mr. Caldwell paused briefly, the kind of pause that comes before something unexpected, I shifted in my seat. Then he continued, "To my granddaughter Emily." That was the first time my name had been spoken in the room all evening. Olivia's chin tilted slightly, not down. Up, like she already knew what was coming. Martha gave a small sigh, almost audible. Mr. Caldwell didn't flinch. "I leave the sum of $1. No one moved. Not a single cough, not a single chair creak. Then from my right, Martha let out a small chuckle, the kind that wasn't meant to be cruel, but came out that way anyway. "She'll make her own way," she said lightly, voice dripping with something I'd known since childhood. "Some kids just don't need handouts." I turned toward her, not fully, just enough, and I smiled, but I didn't say a word. I could feel their eyes even though they tried to hide it. Olivia kept her posture tight, her shoulders pulled back like she was still on stage. Martha had already returned to her calm smirk, the one she wore at school awards. Olivia won, even when I was the one who brought home straight A's. Henry didn't speak. He almost never did in these moments. His silence wasn't neutral, it was approval without having to say it aloud. Mr. Caldwell kept reading, unshaken. To Emily, he continued, "Though the financial sum is modest, know that my recognition of you is not defined by dollars. What you've done and how you've lived, I've seen it." He closed the folder gently. That was all for me. And it was enough. Martha shifted in her seat. Olivia glanced sideways, her jaw tight. It was the kind of ending they expected for me. Small, quiet, dismissible. I stayed in my chair, hands folded in my lap. The room moved on. Mr. Caldwell spoke with one of the witnesses about signing confirmation. Martha leaned in to whisper something to Olivia, something that made her daughter laugh soft but sharp. Henry checked his watch. I stood up. No one noticed at first. I reached for my coat and slid one arm through the sleeve. Still no one turned. But when I picked up Grandpa's folded letter, the one Mr. Caldwell had left on the table beside the folder, the room paused. I didn't take it like I was stealing it. I took it like it belonged with me. Martha looked up, a flicker of protest in her expression. I met her eyes, calm, direct. "Grandpa said he wanted me to hear it," I said softly. "So I think I'll keep it." Mr. Caldwell didn't object. He nodded, the kind of nod that doesn't need words. As I walked past Olivia's chair, I noticed her hands. One gripped her water glass too tightly, the other clenched under the table. At the doorway, I paused. The voices behind me picked up again the business of wrapping up a will logistics estate transfers, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. When I stepped outside, the air was crisp and the sun had started dipping behind the trees. I exhaled slowly, the paper still in my hand, and behind the door, someone I wasn't sure who said my name out loud. Once, quietly. That was the first time it didn't feel like an afterthought. 2 days before the will reading, I arrived at the family house. It wasn't my house anymore, hadn't been for years. But the gravel driveway still crunched the same under my shoes. The wreath on the door was a little crooked, like someone had put it up in a hurry. Probably Martha. When I rang the bell, Olivia answered. She looked surprised, like she hadn't expected I'd come early or at all. "You're early," she said flatly, stepping aside. Inside, the air smelled like rosemary and lemon cleaner, the kind Martha liked to use right before guests arrived. A familiar scent that used to mean comfort. Now it meant performance. "Room's the same," Olivia said over her shoulder as she walked away. "You can take the guest one. Not your room. Not Emily's room. Just the guest one." I nodded and wheeled my small suitcase past the family portraits, the ones that hadn't changed in a decade. Olivia in her graduation gown. Olivia at the company retreat. Olivia with Henry and Martha at the holiday gala. I wasn't in any of them. That night at dinner, the table was set for 4, the good china, linen napkins. The roast came out steaming and Martha poured the wine without asking. "Red okay for you?" she said, already tipping the bottle. "It's fine," I replied. She didn't make eye contact. We ate mostly in silence. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, it's tight and expectant. Henry cleared his throat. "Caldwell said he'll be by 9 sharp Thursday." Olivia nodded. "I told him we'd be ready. No one asked if I wanted coffee. They just brought out the dessert and placed 1 slice fewer than the number of people at the table." I didn't point it out. The next morning, I found Olivia in the kitchen organizing the mail. One thick envelope was set aside, addressed in Mr. Caldwell's neat script. "What's that?" I asked lightly. She looked at me for a second, then back at the envelope. "Oh, just the seating layout for Thursday. Formalities, you know. I thought it was just us and Caldwell." "It is," she said too quickly. "But Grandpa was thorough. There's a process I hadn't been told about." Later that afternoon, I offered to help Martha with the floral arrangements. "I've already finished," she said without turning around. "You'd only get in the way now." I bit my tongue. Right. The moment hung there heavy. She added, "Besides, you never had an eye for these things." Olivia always knew how to balance a setting. When I didn't respond, she finally looked at me. What she said, as if daring me to say something. "It's true." That night I stayed in the guest room with the creaky floorboards and the cold draft that never went away. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sounds of the house footsteps, muffled voices moving above me like ghosts. Somewhere I heard Martha laugh, a soft, knowing laugh, like the kind she gave after a snide remark landed. It wasn't loud, but it carried, and it didn't need words to make its mark. The morning of the reading, I came downstairs dressed simply, navy blouse, slacks, low heels. Martha glanced up from the coffee pot and gave me a once-over. "No black?" she asked. "Grandpa didn't want a funeral," I replied. She hummed non-committal and stirred her mug. Olivia floated in a few minutes later, perfectly put together, dark green sheath dress, delicate pearls. She looked every bit the heiress. Even Henry had polished his shoes. Mr. Caldwell arrived exactly at 9, carrying a leather folder and a stainless steel pen. His presence shifted the energy in the room. Not dramatic, just a subtle straightening of backs, a lowering of voices. "Shall we begin?" he said, settling into the high-backed armchair near the fireplace. We all took our seats. I sat closest to the window, sunlight slicing across the rug and warming my knees. Martha and Henry took the love seat. Olivia crossed her legs, deliberately facing Caldwell. He opened the folder. "Before we begin, I've been instructed to read a short letter from your grandfather," he said. There was a pause, the kind that crackled. But instead of reading, he reached into his folder and pulled out a small box, placed it gently on the table. This, he said, was meant for Emily, from your grandfather. All eyes turned. My breath caught, but I didn't move. Caldwell looked at me. You can open it. I reached forward slowly, the weight of Olivia's stare on my skin like a sun lamp. The box clicked open. Inside, a small antique compass. Brass. Well worn. I knew it instantly. Grandpa's hiking compass, the one he always kept in his jacket pocket when we used to walk the trails behind the cabin. I ran my thumb over the glass. It was still scratched, slightly foggy. No one said anything. He wanted you to have it, Caldwell said softly. He said you'd always known where true north was, even when others didn't. Silence. A shift. Then Olivia exhaled sharply. Is that it? She asked. Caldwell didn't look at her. That's the personal item. Now on to the reading. He began with the formalities, names, assets, trust allocations. His voice calm, measured. Olivia's name came up first as expected. A sizable trust, the beach property in Maine, and 60% share in the family company. Martha nodded approvingly. Henry got the summer home and his collection of vintage cars. Then Caldwell cleared his throat. And to Emily? Everyone looked back at me. Caldwell's voice didn't change, but his gaze held steady. The remaining 40% of the company shares, and sole custodianship of the Pine Ridge property, including the cabin and surrounding acreage. I didn't blink. Martha leaned forward. Excuse me, Caldwell continued. Additionally, a separate letter is to be delivered directly to Emily regarding the intentions behind these decisions. Per Mr. Whitmore's instructions, no copies will be distributed. A silence fell thicker than before. Olivia's jaw clenched. You mean she gets Miss Whitmore? Caldwell interrupted smoothly. Your grandfather's wishes were clear. He trusted Emily to handle this with discretion. The word landed with weight. Discretion. I said nothing, just held the compass steady in my palm. Across from me, Martha's expression flickered. Not anger, not yet, just confusion dressed up as concern. Henry shifted in his seat, lips pressed into a thin line. No one spoke, because there was nothing they could say without sounding small. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't expected it. But here it was public, irreversible, and I didn't need to explain it to anyone. I just sat quietly, letting them all hear the tick of the old grandfather clock behind us. Steady, undeniable, like truth. Olivia's hands clenched on the hem of her dress. For a second, I thought she might actually say something, demand an explanation, accuse me of scheming. But then her mouth tightened and she leaned back, crossing her arms instead. She would never lower herself to begging. Not in front of Caldwell. Martha, however, wasn't as composed. This makes no sense, she said sharply, turning to Mr. Caldwell. Why would he do that? Olivia has been managing everything. She's the one who showed up. Emily's been. She stopped herself just in time. Been what Mom, absent, invisible, less than Caldwell didn't flinch. Your father's reasoning was outlined privately to Emily. His wishes were clear. I was merely the executor. Henry finally spoke. Maybe we should discuss this as a family before final decisions are made. There are no decisions left to make, Caldwell replied. This is the will, signed, witnessed, filed. The silence that followed was cold and brittle. I sat very still, my palms warm against the wooden box in my lap. I could feel the tiny ridges in the compass under my thumb grounding me. I need air, Olivia muttered, standing too fast. Her chair scraped the floor, the sound sharp and jarring. She walked out of the room without another word, heels clicking down the hallway. Martha followed seconds later, muttering something about needing water. That left Henry, Mr. Caldwell, and me. Caldwell packed his documents slowly with the same care he used to unfold them. No rush, no indulgence, just order. You don't have to say anything, he said to me quietly. He knew you wouldn't want the spectacle. I looked at him. Why did he wait until now? He paused, then offered a small smile. Because now they had no choice but to listen. That landed harder than I expected. Not because I needed them to hear, but because he was right. For once, I hadn't had to explain myself or fight for a seat at the table. The moment had been handed to me quiet and whole. Henry cleared his throat. I didn't know he left you the cabin, he said awkwardly. I always thought he'd give it to, well, to someone else. Someone else I repeated more to myself than to him. He looked down at his hands. It meant a lot to him. That place. I guess it makes sense. He didn't say he agreed, but he didn't argue either. Progress. As Caldwell rose to leave, he turned to me. There's something in the cabin waiting for you. A letter. He asked that you read it alone. I nodded. Then he was gone. I stayed a while watching the dust shift in the sunlight. Martha came back eventually, face composed again. She didn't look at me. Neither did Olivia when she returned, phone in hand, texting furiously. The performance was over, but the silence lingered, not hollow this time, heavy with things unspoken. And for once I didn't feel like I had to fill it. They knew. They all knew. And no one laughed anymore. The cabin was exactly how I remembered it. The pine needles scattered across the porch, the front door that stuck a little unless you lifted it as you pushed, the faint scent of cedar and old books inside. It was quiet, but not empty like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. I stood in the center of the living room for a moment, letting it all settle in. Sunlight streamed in through the dusty windows, painting stripes on the wooden floor. The only sound was the soft hum of the fridge, still running like nothing had changed. On the mantel, just beneath the old photo of my grandfather fishing with Henry and Olivia, was the envelope. My name in his handwriting. No salutation. Just Emily. I took it and sat down on the armchair he used to nap in, the one with the sag in the cushion that fit him perfectly. It welcomed me now like it had always meant to. The letter was short. You saw what they didn't. You listened when they spoke over you. You gave without keeping score. That's why this is yours. Not to reward you, but because I trust you'll know what to do with it. Let it be a place for choosing what matters. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, setting it on the coffee table. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the cabin like a whisper. I imagined Grandpa sitting on the porch, sipping his bitter black coffee, saying nothing while watching the trees sway. He'd never been one for speeches. And yet, somehow, he'd said everything. I stayed there until sunset, moving from room to room, touching old frames and shelves like greeting old friends. There was a peace here that I hadn't known I was missing, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but waits until you notice it. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. Did you know about this before the reading? I stared at the screen. The question felt sharp, like it was searching for something to blame. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a photo of the cabin, the porch, the light spilling from the window, and sent it back. No caption. 10 minutes later, she sent another message. I didn't expect that. Still, I said nothing. Sometimes silence says it better. I put the phone down and stepped outside, letting the screen door creak closed behind me. The air smelled like pine and smoke from a distant chimney. I sat on the porch steps watching the sky fade into night and pulled Grandpa's compass from my pocket. The needle spun once before settling north. I didn't need directions anymore, but holding it I felt aligned. The stars came out slowly, one by one. And for the first time in years, I felt seen, not because someone called my name, but because someone had known it all along. The next morning, I returned to the city. The streets were already buzzing, joggers, dog walkers, delivery trucks, squeezing past double-parked cars. But I moved through it all like I was still in the woods, like the quiet hadn't left me yet. The reading of the full will was scheduled that afternoon. Not just the ceremony piece, the real one where logistics and titles were clarified. It wasn't at a courthouse this time, but in Mr. Caldwell's downtown office, a space filled with books and soft lamplight. I arrived first. He greeted me with a nod and a warm Emily. There was a weight in his gaze, but not pity, just understanding. You ready? He asked gently. I didn't say yes. I just walked in and sat down. The rest of them trickled in, Olivia in head-to-toe black again, her lips tight, Martha in a navy suit already looking annoyed, Henry lagging behind more out of sync than usual. They barely glanced at me. Once seated, Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat the same way he had during the ceremony. Then he began. First, some formalities, then the assets, stocks, properties, art, the cabin. With each word, Martha's eyebrows lifted, Olivia leaned forward, Henry stared at the rug. When he reached the trust, he paused. Per Mr. Whitaker's explicit instructions, Mr. Caldwell said slowly, "The majority of the trust will be managed by Emily Whitaker with full decision rights." No one spoke. Then Martha's voice cracked. Mr. Caldwell didn't flinch. He wanted someone who could act with clarity without personal gain. He chose Emily. Olivia stood. "But she's not even involved in the foundation. She is now," Caldwell replied. It was his final request, and it's legally binding. There it was again, the silence. Not like before, not dismissive or indifferent. This time it was stunned, uneasy. I sat still, hands folded in my lap. I didn't look at them. I didn't gloat. I didn't explain. Martha's chair squeaked as she leaned toward me. "You think this makes up for everything," her voice was low bitter. "He always gave you too much credit." I turned to her, not with anger, just calm. "I didn't ask for any of this," I said, "but I'll do right by it, that was all." I stood, thanked Mr. Caldwell, and walked out. The door shut softly behind me, but the echo felt loud. In the hallway, I paused by the window. Outside, people moved normal, busy, unaffected. The world kept going. I checked my phone. Another message from Olivia. "Are you going to sell the cabin?" I stared at the words. Then typed, "No, I'm moving in." Sent. A minute passed, then why I didn't respond. She didn't need the answer. She knew. They all did now. That evening I drove to the cabin. It was nearly dusk when I reached the old gravel road, the same one we used to take as kids, bouncing in the back seat, Olivia always claiming the window side, me quietly staring ahead. Trees arched above like they were remembering. The cabin wasn't grand. Weathered cedar shingles, a porch that creaked, windows that blinked in the sun like tired eyes. But it was still standing, still waiting. I unlocked the door. Inside it smelled of pine and dust and memory. The furniture was untouched, a quilt folded on the armchair, books stacked neatly on the table. A photo of Grandpa and me fishing still sat by the window. No dust on the frame. I set my bag down. In the silence, I could almost hear his voice. Not words, but presence, the way he'd hum when slicing apples, the shuffle of his boots on old floorboards. I walked into the kitchen. On the counter was a sealed envelope. My name on the front. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. "Emily," it read, "you don't need permission to take up space anymore. You never did. I just hope this gives you enough room to grow." No signature, just that. I folded the letter and slipped it into my coat pocket. Later that week, I started small fixing shutters, airing the rooms, sorting through the attic. I found stacks of his old journals, maps he'd drawn, even recipes written in his tidy scrawl. He'd left a legacy that was more than money. He left a way of seeing. One morning, while hauling firewood from the shed, I heard a car. A sleek black SUV pulled into the clearing. Olivia stepped out. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at the cabin, then at me. "I used to hate this place," she said finally. "The bugs, the quiet." I didn't answer. She took a step closer. "Why are you really here, Emily?" I rested the axe on the porch rail. "Because I can be." She nodded. Not in agreement, more like understanding, or maybe just accepting. "I wanted it too," she admitted, "not for the same reasons, but I wanted it." "I know." "Do you hate me?" "No." A pause. "Do you forgive me?" I looked at her. The wind stirred her hair, and for a second she looked like the girl from the old photographs, before competition, before disappointment. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'm not angry." She blinked. That seemed to shake her more than if I'd yelled. She turned to leave, then stopped. "You look different out here." "Maybe I am." She drove away. No slam of the door, no raised voices, just gravel crunching and then silence. That night I lit a fire in the cabin's hearth. It took a while to catch. I sat on the rug wrapped in a blanket, listening to the flames settle. There was no celebration, no vindication, just peace. I thought about the reading of the will, how everyone had looked at Olivia, how the room had held its breath when Mr. Caldwell turned to me, how no one spoke when my name was read. It hadn't been about revenge, it had been about recognition, earned, quietly. I sipped my tea, warm in both hands. Outside, snow started to fall. The trees held their breath again. I didn't need anyone to clap. I didn't need to be told I'd done well. I was finally where I belonged, and no one laughed anymore. Some stories don't need to be shouted. Sometimes the quietest moments echo the loudest, a door left ajar, a name spoken softly, a gaze that doesn't look away. She never raised her voice. She never had to. And in the end, when the dust settled and the noise faded, they finally saw what they had missed. But by then she was already walking away, not out of bitterness but because she no longer needed to stay.